Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. Our regular viewers know that I often begin the webcast a bit tongue-in-cheek, pointing out that I am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. That is meant for those who are new to the webcast, who should know that this is not a safe space for those who may be easily offended by having ideas challenged or by our satire. This is broadcast number 135, and this week our friend Jill Martin Rische from Walter Martin Ministries joins us again. Yes, she has willingly become one of our...
In spite of her previous experiences.
In spite of her previous experience. So, we will be talking about Walter Martin, the cults, and the church. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which sponsors the Unknown Webcast, and our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie, baby.
Greetings from sunny, well, actually cloudy Florida today, but it doesn't matter because the palm tree saw his shadow and we have 12 more months of summer. As a result, our sponsors for this broadcast, well, you said it, now I'm going to say it, our webcast include World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. World's End Theology Outlet, and the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience, which is why you should try out the Bible Buffet. And if you really like this webcast or you're annoyed by it terribly and you want to inflict it on others, please, to ensure continued access to this program, go to midwestoutreach.org and click the yellow donate button and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. All right, now it's I'm trying to get the mouse up to the word stop, and it's not. I don't have a touch screen. I don't know why it's not cooperating. This is not one of our commercials, guys.
But it's a fun one, even when it is one of our commercials.
I hit the escape button. Now you can see my pet dolphins. Okay,
I love the dolphins. Every time I see it, I think of the what's the movie? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe.
Yeah,
as
thanks
the
for the
dolphins
fish.
sing so long, and thanks for the fish.
See, now I'm looking at my resources, my performance. I'm not using too much memory. The CPU is, but for some reason my mouse was just not. I was like, "Come on, you can do it. You can hit the stop button." It wasn't.
Well, I never use too much memory because I don't have much to spare, frankly. So
yeah.
In fact, someone said, they have Facebook has these great things of memories from a year ago or memories from 5 years ago. I need them to give me memories from 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
So that when I get to the kitchen, I can look at it and go, "Oh yeah, that's why I came here." But
yeah,
they're not doing that.
So wait a minute, why are we here today? I forget. Oh,
yeah. Oh, that's okay, right.
There's right. Jill. Hi, Jill.
Hello.
Yes.
Jill Martin Rische, who's I was going to ask you, by the way, what is it like to be the daughter of a famous theologian?
Challenging at times, but a huge blessing in my life, and I wouldn't change it for anything.
Oh, cool.
I got that impression last year at the conference when he talked about his life. So, yeah, and I'm kind of in a reminiscing mood. Somebody I'm in contact with on Twitter is putting up old Christian, contemporary Christian music albums on their Twitter feed, like Bob Dylan's Slow Train Coming, back from the 70s. And those were, the 70s especially for me, were really amazing times because I became a Christian. And one of the first people I was introduced to was your dad via cassette tapes. Remember those things?
Oh, yeah.
Cassette tapes. I saw a video of teenagers trying to figure out how to use a dial phone.
Oh, that's hilarious.
That was really fun. There's a couple of them out there. They're all funny because the kids have no idea what they're doing. And I often wonder, well, what would they do with a cassette tape? How would they think those worked? But that's how we were able to listen other than the radio. That's how we were able to listen to sermons, lectures, all kinds of information came from cassette tapes. And your dad I still have some of his. I don't have a player, but I have the tapes.
Yeah, I have boxes and boxes of his cassettes that we have not even had time to
Digitized.
transfer over to digital. Yeah, but
Wow.
I know, and some of them are, I just think, well, a lot of them, if not all of them, are amazing. There's especially the Melodyland ones are so awesome because he's just on fire there. So
So where are there are some online, right? There, I mean, you're
right.
and
Well, we have a free listening library at waltermartin.com, and then other people have put them up all over YouTube. So
okay, so waltermartin.com. We want people to see that. We're going to make sure they do. But I will definitely visit just to relive, if nothing else, to relive old times, and to really be reacquainted with some of the really great teaching. And he would not only have, I mean, these were live lectures, many of them. He was going from church to church, I imagine.
right, they were all live. Yeah.
And yeah, and sometimes there were cultists in the crowd too, if I recall. And he
Oh yes,
interacted.
they
Yeah.
followed him
One,
from church to church. So
right. Well,
yeah.
one, which was at Melodyland, was someone who you may recall, Ron, was Bill Sentnar, Bill and Joan Sentnar.
I sort of recall him.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, well, they had
I
been,
recall Joan for sure.
fourth generation JWs. He answered all of the questions south of the Mason-Dixon line for the Awake magazine. Walter had gone to the Watchtower headquarters in 1958. And they spent several hours in long discussion. And I guess Walter went back 2 years later and Bill locked him out of the building, wouldn't talk to him.
Because
I never got a because, but what I did get was in 1972 or 3, Walter was teaching at Melodyland, and a guy stood up in the auditorium and said, "My name is Bill Sentnar, and you came to the Watchtower headquarters," and they became very good friends at that point. So
okay.
they did kind of the witness at your door dialogue, which they
Right.
taped. Yeah. So
Well, so this is a picture of the website. I'm kind of blowing it up here so that you can see Dr. Martin. And now I'm going to hit the enter button and shrink it back down. And this is what you see when you go there. And somewhere around here are links to resources. Would that be where you'd go? Oh, listening library right there, right?
Right, listening library.
Okay, this is where I'm going to go to very soon. So,
and I saw you had Jan Markell up there, and there's a reason for that,
Yes.
which is
I'm a co-host on her radio program,
okay.
and also I do her social media and write articles for olivetreeviews.org
Okay.
for Understanding the Times Radio.
That's good. That's good. So you're pretty busy. So Walter Martin,
Yeah.
one of the questions that we wanted to kind of deal with, because I get this fairly often, is some would say, well, Walter Martin was soft on Seventh-day Adventism. Others would say, well, when he was working on Kingdom of the Cults, they had committed to making certain changes in their teaching, but then after it was published, they did not. And my response is, I have no idea. I wasn't there.
Well, I don't know that it has anything to do with being soft. I think it has to do with being fair. When he was approached by the SDA leadership and he, sat down and they went through questions on doctrine, and he never wanted to shut anyone out if what they truly believed was Christian doctrine. And so that's why he tried to be fair, and he and Dr. Barnhouse said, well, let's take another look at this. So that was the motivation behind it. And I think that he would stand by what he did. I think he did stand by it all the way up until his death. So, things will obviously not remain the same in any denomination, any faith. It changes sometimes, and usually the change is not for the best. So
usually.
I think that he was reevaluating things. He reevaluated in the 70s, he reevaluated in the 80s, and he was concerned by some things that he heard. And so he really arrived at the conclusion that there were two streams of Adventism. There was an evangelical Adventism, and there was a traditional Adventism, and the traditional Adventism was the one that he was concerned with, and they were actively working against the evangelical SDA side of things. And when I say two streams, I'm not saying that they were established individually. It was basically a cultural thing, depending on where you were in the country or the world, what the congregation was like. And those that were taking the traditional route of elevating Ellen G. White back up to being basically, completely inerrant herself,
Yeah.
how she did things. That is where he had a huge issue, especially since she'd been proven the mistakes she had made were, historical facts. So he had a huge problem with that. And he also had a really deep concern for people who were coming out of this traditional side of Adventism. They'd been fired because they wanted to stand for the doctrinal agreement that evangelicals had with SDA, which was questions on doctrine. That was the center, questions on doctrine. The center of the entire agreement and the acceptance was based on that. And so when you have people in the traditional SDA saying, no, you can't believe that, that's heretical, and you have others leaving, obviously that's huge cause for concern. So he was very troubled by that. Plus the leadership was taking that position. The leadership in the 80s was taking that position. So
you make an interesting point that actually is true in all groups. Belief is not static, and organizations are not static. We see that with the SDA, certainly. Right. Worldwide Church of God went through a major split, part of which went toward orthodoxy and became very good defenders of the deity of Christ and the Trinity for a period of time.
Yeah.
And then after Joe Tkach, I don't remember how he left exactly, but after he was no longer president, they started moving back to second chance teaching and other sorts of things. And for a while, they were members of Evangelical Ministries to New Religions, of which you and I are members. And later, we, as a board, we had to say, guys, you're shifting back to your false teaching. We're either going to have you move back to orthodoxy, or we're going to have to remove you from membership. And they never responded back, so we had to remove them from membership. You have that in Southern Baptist churches, even. The battle between conservatism and liberalism is still ongoing. And who is ultimately going to end up taking the helms of leadership is hard telling. So
it is, yeah.
I noticed that just recently there was a film, a very well-produced film on the origins of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. This is a picture of Ellen G. White here from the 19th century. And it chronicles what was known as the Great Disappointment, how that began. Have you seen this film? I forget the name of it.
Well, which one are you talking about? Who produced it?
I believe it was the denomination itself, Seventh-day Adventist, the SDA Church. It's a very. I just happened to be doing an adult Sunday school class on the end times and the different doctrines, surveying all the different views, and I came across this. It's I think within the last couple of years, it is a dramatization of that begins with William Miller's early preaching, and it goes through how he set the date for 1844 for the second coming, how there was this great disappointment, and how Ellen G. White then reinterprets the events. I think it's at least an hour long. You can watch the whole thing, I think, on YouTube.
Okay, so that's not the Seventh-day Adventism, the spirit behind the church, right?
I'm not recalling the exact title.
No, that would be a more of an expose.
Yeah, that was I think Jeremiah Films in 1999, and it portrayed and it portrayed my father's beliefs inaccurately. So.
Oh no, this is strictly. It looks like it's strictly a tool for their own evangelism.
Okay, that's different.
It's not answering critics. It's not. It's a very romanticized portrait of what happened. there's no attempt to that I've seen to interact with any critics of the church. This is like within the last couple of years. We're talking, might have come out 2015, 16, something like
Oh,
that.
okay. No, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, and you know it's worth watching just for this is their historical accounting of their own origin.
Mhm.
And then, of course, you get into the 19th century, and they call her Sister White, right? Or is it Sister? I forget. Well, anyways, she's. I've known people who've left the Adventist Church, and you're right. They cite her as though she is Scripture.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Scripture is subject to her. That's a big problem.
Yeah, I'd have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
How would they explain that Scripture is subject to her? What does that mean to them?
Well,
To
she
say
just.
that.
Oh, go ahead.
To say that. What does that mean when they say
Well,
that?
I think it's just the elevation of someone as basically a prophet type individual.
Oh yeah.
And, the prophecy supersedes Scripture. Since when? I mean, that's one of the big red flags, the big warning signs.
So she was kind of like a pope without the big hat.
Right. Unfortunately, yeah.
And so then in the late 70s, I became aware of, well, I had Kingdom of the Cults, and I had, your dad's chapter where he talks about how, okay, we used to think, I don't know if it was in the original one, was it? Or was it in a later one that where he rethought Seventh day Adventism?
I think
You
they
had it?
updated sections of it, yeah, with his
Okay.
opinions, but
And so there was this, and I actually did run into Seventh day Adventists who really seemed to be evangelical. They were not, they didn't try to tell me I had to become a vegetarian or join their denomination. In fact, I ran into there. We had a Seventh day Adventist, we had apartment buildings in our neighborhood near our church for, I guess, Seventh day Adventist workers. There was a sign, out in front. We knew this belonged to the SDA church.
okay.
And one of the residents, a gentleman, a young man, actually came to our church because he was trying to establish contacts with evangelicals in the area.
Wow.
Yeah, this was big. This is a big deal. And I tried to be really encouraging to him. And I didn't really get very deeply into it. He actually visited he had to come on Sunday, he'd already gone to his church on Saturday. So that's one convenient thing. If they're going to church on Saturday, they can visit your church on Sunday without violating.
Well, if you're part of a church that's not so traditional, I mean, there are people who literally are trapped in the legalism that's part of some Seventh-day Adventist churches, and they are actually very afraid to have any kind of to participate in anything outside of that church or their own denomination. So,
Yeah,
it just really depends which stream you are
right.
in, which congregation you are a part of. The traditional Adventist side of things, they're stepping into some dangerous waters.
Mhm.
If you take a look at the kingdom of the cults, basically what we say, what my father said, and Kurt has, vetted, Kurt Van Gordon has vetted that also and gone through and looked for even more documentation, which he has found on what my father said. And, basically they're promoting Ellen White as being an infallible interpreter.
So
So
my story comes from the early 80s, and now you're bringing us up to date.
well, in the early 80s, that was changing too. I mean, that was quite evident then.
They were going back to traditionalism?
Oh yeah. I mean, this
Okay.
is a stream that developed pretty much through the 60s and into the 70s. It started to grow, the traditional Adventist side of things, and then into the 80s even more so, which is why my father had to turn around and look at it again and say, wait a minute here, you cannot elevate Ellen G. White as, basically a pope, like you said, Don.
Yeah.
And, you cannot say that she is infallible. You cannot walk down that road, because if you do, then you are walking into a traditional camp of the cults. That's what they do. If you're going to deny questions on doctrine, then you're going to deny the agreements on doctrine that the evangelicals came to with the SDA leadership back in the 1950s. And you're going to put yourself in an extremely difficult position, which is what is happening. Now the evangelical church is having to look at Adventism and say, what's going on here with the leadership? Why are you purging those who support questions on doctrine? Why? And if you are doing that, then we have to take another look at how things are going there on the traditional Adventist side of it, because it's becoming, as my father said, theologically bankrupt.
You know, I want to transition a little bit here because I became a Christian in 1974 and wasn't really familiar with anything apologetic until late 70s, early 80s, probably. Had not met Norm Geisler, had not read any of his material really at that point, but had heard of Walter Martin, who it seemed to me was unafraid to tackle almost any kind of
right.
Very true. Very true.
That's right.
Including Jehovah's Witnesses, and some of the issues, are sort of translational problems because they sort of tinker with their translation of the Bible, and that can have some serious ramifications as you go along. Ron, you want to? We have one of our.
We're talking about translations here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, a new translation can cause problems, and our friends at World Ends Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone, they want to know if you've noticed some problems lately. Well, you know what the problem is. Men's hairstyles have gone downhill at your Kingdom Hall. The reason, of course, is misunderstandings arising from the New World Translation revision. The solution? Grease your head with classic New World Translation hair oil. Once again, you can say, with oil, you have greased my head, according to the original 1984 translation of Psalm chapter 23, verse 5, based on the old light of the original New World Translation, you know, the one that the Apostle Paul used. And you can get this at World's End Theology Outlet. Please get that New World Translation hair oil. So you don't want to see, there's just stuff you just don't want to see at your local Kingdom Hall. And this will help.
That will definitely help. So what prompted him to sort of tackle any group that comes along, like Jehovah's Witnesses?
Well, he was called to it. That's what God called him to do. He just sent him out there and put that, you get that passion in your heart. God communicates that passion. When he gives you a calling, he gives you the passion to fulfill that calling. And by passion, I mean just the strength spiritually and the knowledge and the direction to fulfill that calling. So he went to look for answers. He couldn't find them anywhere. So he decided to go directly to the cult itself, and that turned out to be the wisest, I think, and the most fair and the most honest approach, because how do you argue against yourself? That's why he was never sued as far as the Kingdom of the Occults, and he had their quotes in there. He quoted them. He directly related theological issues to their own writings, and that's what made a huge difference in the answers. So he did it because God called him to it, and it just went from there.
I believe God uses circumstances to call us, and I look back at my circumstance when I felt called to reach out and witness to Jehovah's Witnesses and then Mormons, and it began with Jehovah's Witnesses when I was still in high school, and kids from my high school who were Jehovah's Witnesses actually came to my door, and I wasn't able to answer them. And that's when I heard about, I had Christian friends who said, well, you need to listen to Walter Martin's tapes. And then, of course, I heard about him talking about Mormonism, and we had Mormons in the neighborhood. So my circumstance was I was in a kind of a hotbed area where we were being proselytized heavily. And would it be correct to say that one of the circumstances God used in your father's life is that California was one of those hotbed areas where you were just crawling with all kinds of weird cults and stuff like that? Or was he in California when he got called?
No, he was on the East Coast.
So
But that was a hotbed too. I mean,
okay.
it's everywhere. I don't know that geographically. Yeah, there are some places that are busier than others when it comes to the cults, but the East Coast was very much a spiritually bankrupt area as far as the inroads the cults had made. I mean, look at the Brooklyn Eagle in New York. I mean, that chronicles the entire early history of the Jehovah's Witnesses. So their roots were in New York.
Yeah.
And so you're right from the standpoint of his location and the circumstances. I think God uses many things to call us.
How about personal interactions? Did when they came to the door, I assume they came to the door knocking in your neighborhood. Did you ever watch your dad in action?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was very kind. We were talking about kindness before. He was extremely kind in how he dealt with people who came to our door.
Okay.
And he always encouraged kindness in us.
All right.
That's important because we have a mutual acquaintance, I'd like to say friend, but I don't know that he's friendly with me these days, who some years ago had decided that Walter Martin was wrong. And he was using what did he call it, Ron?
Well, the buzz phrase, I'm not sure he invented it. Somebody did. It was called heresy rationalist apologetics.
Okay.
That's the nickname.
And the problem with that was what exactly?
Well, they were arguing. I don't know. It's like Dr. Martin used rational arguments based on the proper interpretation of Scripture to argue against heresies that had crept into the church. Now, I don't know how anybody can have a problem with that, but these people did. It's been about over a dozen years since I read through their materials, and all I can remember is just being very, very, very unimpressed with the logic and the reason, but also unimpressed with the fact that the church's history, going back to the 2nd century, there was a guy named Irenaeus who wrote a treatise, a famous treatise called Against Heresies.
Exactly.
Right. And so from the very beginning, the church has taken very seriously the corruption of its teachings. To go against Walter Martin on the basis of whatever this heresy rationalist approach is called is really to go against the entire history of apologetics, particularly. I mean, there are different kinds of apologetics, but I would say they break down into 2 broad categories. One is where you're an apologist, or maybe I should say 3, apologist against atheists, which really historically that's kind of recent. I mean, to have a huge number of human beings on the planet denying the existence of any deity is really a very recent phenomenon.
It is.
So this is one brand that's newly developed. Then there's the brand of being an apologist on behalf of Christianity to people of completely different religions. And then there is apologetics that defends the faith against those who have wormed their way into the church and have begun twisting the church's teachings, the Bible's teachings. And that's addressed directly in Scripture. So if you're opposed to that, you might as well just forget the book of Jude, the book of 2 Peter, things that Paul said in his epistles. Jesus talks about wolves among the sheep. You have to like rip out a huge portion of the New Testament to be opposed to that. But these people,
which leads me now to a question, because since I have become a Christian, I sort of watched a transition from let's say Walter Martin, who was really quite popular. And it seems to me that at the time, many in the church wanted to be witnesses to those in cults, but needed information. To maybe a time when pastors became fearful of apologists, and it was hard to get their ear because we were viewed as divisive, and certainly there's some of that. And now we have sort of an odd thing going on where a lot of the church is not apologetics friendly, let's say, and yet we seem to have this growth of apologetics types groups springing up all over the place.
Mm.
So I want to go back to Walter Martin and say, which we talked about before we went live, how did the church receive Walter in the early days?
Oh, they were basically starving for that approach to the gospel where you say, stand up, know what you believe, and know why you believe it. And then he was telling them what they believed and why they believed it. And he
Right.
was also giving them reasons for faith. So this whole idea that, apologetics is somehow separate from the Christian faith in some strange way is not biblical. I mean, all you need to do is look at Jude 3. All you need to do is read the book of Acts. What were they doing through the entire book of Acts?
Yeah.
Yes, they were evangelizing, but they were also putting up a firm fight for the faith. And that's, Jude is very particular, earnestly contend for the faith. Don't stand there and kind of, be mealy-mouthed and, just sickeningly sweet, like my father used to drive my father crazy. Put up a firm fight for the faith, earnestly contend for the faith. That doesn't mean be rude. I mean, that's ridiculous. You have to balance that earnestly with love one another. But love can be firm. Love can be at times even sharp. And Paul used that kind of love when he was defending the faith. He was quite sarcastic in many places in his letters to the church. He used sarcasm as a tool. Now, what are we going to say? Are we going to say that the Apostle Paul did not know what he was doing and he was wrong? Because that was the approach that my father took. When he was in school studying, his specialty, it was the patristic fathers. He went way back to the early church and saw how the fathers defended the faith. And he patterned his defense of the faith like that. Paul's defense, Peter's defense, John's defense, and then right down the line, Polycarp, Irenaeus. I mean, he literally he wanted to know what they taught and how they taught it. And so that was his pattern of teaching. So if you want to point the finger and say, Walter Martin was wrong, well, a lot of people have done that. And I mean, that's their opinion. But, he was basing it on what he saw as a biblical pattern for the defense of the faith. And that's what we are all required to do. It's not just about evangelizing people. You can't, obviously that's a center of what we do and what we're supposed to do and we're required to do, but that's not all of it. You're supposed to defend Jesus. You're supposed to defend your faith.
Yeah. And that's what the false teachers are trying to prevent us from doing.
Exactly.
They're trying to prevent us from giving the true gospel, and they want to give the false gospel. And another thing they do is, it's not as though we only need the gospel as Christians to get us into the church, to get us into God's people, but we also need the gospel, to keep us going. The gospel is a constant source of encouragement to us, a reminder of God's forgiveness, and the false teachers want to take that away from us too. They want to take away our living out the gospel fully by introducing heresies that will keep that from happening too.
A lot of them have bought into the whole Hindu philosophy, that's literally saturated our world, which is live and let live. Don't offend. Whatever you do, someone else has a right to believe what they want to believe and let them believe it. And it's okay for them. That's total Hinduism. And they don't even recognize that.
And it is true they have a right to believe what they want to believe, but that doesn't mean that their beliefs are equally true and valid. I have a right to believe I'm a poached egg, but that doesn't mean I really am a poached egg.
And really the right is, we're talking about human rights before men in terms of civil governments on earth. Nobody here is arguing that we want to, impose belief systems legally on other people. We're not instituting any kind of Christian version of Sharia law or anything like that. But
we should.
Maybe we should. Yeah. No, we shouldn't. But in the meantime, you have certain rights before men, and then you have other rights before God. And one of your rights before God is not to hold to you don't have a right before God. God isn't going to say, well, you lived your life, you died, you followed heresies every step of the way, but it was within your rights to do that. No, that's not going to happen.
Well, this
Yeah.
comes down to absolutes. And all throughout history,
Right.
there have been absolutes. It's only recently that all of a sudden we're taking absolute truth and throwing it out the window. And so that's what's happened in our century. And we're raised, kids are being raised like that today.
Mhm.
There is no absolute truth.
And that leads
And
back,
they can't even argue. They don't even
right.
argue. They don't know how to argue for that belief.
Well,
They
in
don't know how
fact,
to argue for it.
they don't
just
believe in it anymore.
yeah,
They don't even believe in it.
yeah,
They
they
don't.
just profess that there's no truth.
What is it? What percentage of young people believe it's wrong to evangelize, according to a recent survey?
Oh, it's high. It's like 46%.
Yeah, and
Almost
so
half. Yeah.
and in fact, what we're talking about is postmodernism, which has basically said there is no way to establish truth. There really is. You have your truth, I have my truth. And truth is liquid as gender. Everything's
Exactly.
liquid right now.
Yeah.
So
That's scary.
Well, I
So-
discuss this all the time with my students, and they are really stumped. I teach from high school up through college, and they're stumped. Even adults that coming back to school at University of Northwestern that I teach are stumped when it comes to how do you answer the problem of absolute truth. They don't, they have to stop and really think about it. And I don't get many hands raised in class when I bring up that problem, because it's like it's floating around out there and people just accept it as part of our
Yeah.
culture. And there are no answers being given like they were before. Before, there was a much stronger defense against this. In the 70s and 80s, you had people out there on the front lines fighting this consistently. Now they've kind of faded into, the woodwork. They're out there still, but in a much smaller number, I think. And
Mhm.
we're certainly not impacting, and I'm talking about Christian youth and
Right.
Christian adults. We're not impacting them in the churches like we used to.
Well, we have drifted from now. We're going to start picking on the church again, and maybe we need to from time to time. I certainly feel compelled to, but we've kind of shifted from teaching that, from the basic belief that the truth is absolute. That would be 1960s, 70s. Before that, we may not agree on what the truth is, but we did agree that there was a truth we could know, and that we could fight over. And then, as culture began shifting away from that idea toward a sort of postmodernism, the church began shifting away from sound biblical teaching to a market-driven church,
Mm-hmm.
where the important thing became not so much discipling believers and training them, but figuring out ways to get unchurched Harry and Mary into the numbers of the church, so that you can increase your nickels and noses and eventually sneak up on them with the gospel.
Exactly. But that's still, and it's
sneak up with them.
still going strong today. Yeah. I mean, you've got Andy Stanley who says, let's toss out the Old Testament. I mean, different parts of the Old Testament.
Scary stuff, yeah. And a
what?
professor from Wheaton College going, we need to unhitch from the Old Testament. I'm going, wait a minute, you're an Old Testament professor.
I know. And that, they seem to think that they can pick and choose.
Well, you have the classical problem of there's a field of knowledge that we all agree on, or up until now, we agreed that in the realm of the five senses, you could establish truth versus falsehood. You could establish,
Right.
It is always true that if I bring water to the temperature of 100 degrees Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level, the water is going to boil. We call them laws of nature. A guy named David Hume took exception to that. And as a result of his writings, a guy named Immanuel Kant came along. And he was the guy who really changed the rules of the game.
But you can't do that.
You can't, but he did. Yes, he did. He did what no one else could do. He can't, and basically what he said was, okay, there's this realm of knowledge that we all agree that you can establish truth in this realm. Then there's this realm up here. And of course, you have the famous upper story and lower story of Francis Schaeffer. He's just taking these concepts and giving them his own names. And up until that time, it was believed you could know what's up there either by reason, as through Plato, or by revelation, as through Scripture. And of course, the Christian answer was, we know by revelation. Well, Kant came along and said, no, there's no way you can know that. That upper story, that noumenal realm, he called it, as opposed to the phenomenal realm down here. You can't know it. You just can't. It is forever shut off. And that idea has been gradually working its way down into culture today. And not only have we gotten to the point now we're actually seeing people go a step beyond that. They're going beyond Kant. They're saying, not only can you not know what's up here for sure, you can't know what's down here either. You can't know your gender. You can't know anything.
That's
for sure.
Important, right?
That's what postmodernism does. It's taking that extra step. And so there is no knowledge at all. Your truth, my truth isn't just your truth, my truth about heaven and the afterlife. Your truth, my truth might be regarding whether I can marry a tree and sleep with children.
I want to ask Jill a question that is something she will have to guess at based on who she knows her father to be. Because as we look around, what we see is several things. We have the cults, which are not diminishing. Some of them are slowing down. Jehovah's Witnesses are growing at a slower rate than they once were, for example. Mormonism, I think because of the advent of the internet, is kind of wreaking havoc in their ranks.
Very much so.
Right. So we have that kind of in favor. We don't have churches teaching as much on these issues as they ought to, so that they can reach their neighbors who are in various cults. And I get phone calls and emails like every day from someone saying, how can I help my friend? But then we have the problem in the church with the embracing of contemplative prayer, for example. Richard Rohr, who tells us that Jesus became the Christ at a point in time. Roman Catholic priest, is very popular among sort of the seeker-sensitive, purposeless-driven, whatever churches.
I like that. That's really good.
Purposeless-driven church. Okay.
And many of them view apologetics as we're red pencil personalities. High maintenance is how I've heard some church leadership put it, that we're high maintenance. And that's true. I have a red pencil personality. I have my red pencil. For those of you who went to school at about the time I did will recall what that is. You did your test, you handed it to the teacher, she sent it back, and anything was wrong had a red check mark. Wrong. We have red pencil personalities. That's true. So churches tend to not want to have us around. How would Walter Martin have responded to that, do you think?
Well, he ran across some churches like that. I mean, I think that, and it's really sad, but people are dropping pieces of the Bible and just forgetting about them. The reason that we're red pencil persons is that we're all supposed to be that under guard your doctrine.
Right.
Yeah.
Guard your doctrine. That's what being a red pencil Christian is. And they did that specifically. We were warned of that specifically in the New Testament because of times like this, that the church would soften, that people would not think it was so important, or that it would be divisive because we live in a Hindu culture now. And so, which our Christian churches, a lot of them do not recognize. So, what we're doing is following what Scripture says, and you cannot pick and choose that. So my father, when he ran into churches like this, he would run into it usually when he was just before he was getting up on the platform or in the back room praying with the pastor, and they would say to him, well, don't say this and don't say that, and my father would be, well, I'm just going to say what God tells me to say. And you have to live with it. I have people say that to me too. Come to my church, but don't say this, or I want you to talk only about that. And
what are the particular things that you've heard that they don't want you to talk about?
Well, of course, anything that they consider to be divisive. So I mean, it's, and this, I run into this on the radio too, because some Christian radio stations have Mormons who donate on a regular basis, and they don't. Oh yeah, and they don't like it when they're, when the boat gets rocked as far as Mormonism, because then donations may drop off. So now that's not the vast majority, but that is a fact that Mormons listen to Christian radio. So you're going to run into that today, and you're always going to run into it. There are going to be people who say, don't rock the boat, don't make waves. And my father's answer to that was, well, I am who I am. I am who God called me to be. And if you don't want me here, then I won't be here. But if I am here, I will say what he tells me to say. That's what he did.
Well, I have a problem, and I'm trying to remember where the New Testament has a problem. I think the New Testament also has a problem with taking money from unbelievers. Knowingly taking money to support your ministry, and then of course you're tempted to compromise your message to not offend the people who are giving you that money.
Right. Well, maybe it's not the taking of the money, because I clearly recall that God told the Israelites to go to their neighbors and get their gold and whatever, enrich themselves with their stuff before they left Egypt.
Yeah.
And that's what they used to build the temple.
Well, that would have been a compensation for the slavery, but go ahead.
Well, it could be, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think the key is you can't compromise. If they're going to give you money, you cannot. The key is not compromise.
Right. So I'll let you catch that. Okay, you got that?
Done.
Almost. Okay.
I think you don't want to fall into, what they were talking about in the New Testament when they, I think it was Paul who said, I praise God that Christ is preached, but there are some who preach for gain. For gain, and you don't want to fall into that. Are you preaching Christ and accepting things for gain, and not willing to stand up and say Mormonism is bad doctrinally because you're getting $10,000 a month from Mormon donators, donations? So it's kind of like that's where the tricky ground is. You don't want to fall into that.
In the early days, he was very well received, and people were hungry, and he usually didn't get that kind of, pushback, or, he might have gotten it, but he was, generally speaking, they let him say what he wanted to say. Right. And then did that change over time?
Even CBN, someone's just commenting that they never will forget seeing Walter Martin on CBN talking about the little gods doctrine. So he was pretty bold even in the
What
midst
year
of
would that have been?
I don't know. They don't say.
But his time on television, Christian, quote unquote Christian television, was very limited after he would say things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he would be blocked and he would be told in the green room, don't speak. We're all familiar with like the stories he told about that. So, I mean, they were always trying to control what he said back then on the airwaves. And it just would depend on which church he was at. Mostly the churches that he went to were churches pastored by men who were strong and who were bold and who wanted him to say what he had to say because they appreciated hearing it and wanted their people to hear it. So did he run into those things? Yeah, of course. But again, it was a different age. It was a different era. And he saw this day coming. He saw this day coming when we would be so saturated with the Hindu perspective that it was going to be quite a struggle and quite a challenge for the church. The mega church movement has done, incalculable damage to the cause of Christ, I believe, and they continue to do it.
Yeah, and I attended a mega church. Don, you attended a wannabe mega church. I don't know.
and a mega church. I do both.
Which one was the mega church?
Well, we went to Willow Creek. We had a very difficult time with a smaller church we had been part of for years, and because we were hurting, Willow Creek was a great place to hide out.
Yes.
Why? There's no expectation. You show up. They don't even know who you are. You can just kind of mix in. You don't have to commit to anything, and their theme is people don't want to say anything, sign anything, sing anything, or give anything, and that's pretty true. And so, if you want to go to a place to hide out and sort of get a God fix, that's the place to go.
And in fairness, I mean, I knew a lot of people who began their time at Willow Creek with that attitude, but they changed.
Right. Absolutely.
You had a lot of evangelical people who were burned out in the traditional evangelical churches who went there not thinking they were going to stay or commit, and were kind of recharged, rejuvenated, and ended up staying. Now, a lot of those people over time became like me, became disenchanted. For me, it took a year and a half, where I'm starting to hear things from the pulpit that, what? What are you saying?
Another thing, as long as we're kind of on the Willow Creek question, let's say, another thing that was truer is at a point in time, Lee Strobels, who had been with the Chicago Tribune, a reporter of the Chicago Tribune, did research because his wife started going to the church, and he ended up coming to the faith because of his research on the faith. And so here you had someone who became a top-notch apologist, who then, because of that, attracted several other really good. Mark Middleburg was there, Chad Meister, Judson Poling, good, solid apologetics folks. And they started having an apologetics group that would meet on a regular basis and that sort of thing. But that began interfering with what Willow Creek was doing, because guess what? They're red pencil personalities. And the doctrine mattered. And so as those issues began coming up, each of the apologists left. Now they have no apologists there.
Really?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I after a year and a half, I still thought, well, actually, I didn't really think about it when we left. I mean, I was really sold on the megachurch model for a good year or so. I thought this is probably the future. So when Andy Stanley recently said, if you don't take your kids to a megachurch, you're being, what did he say, selfish or stupid or
sinful, I think.
Sinful, I forget. I remember thinking, that's like one of the most idiotic things I've ever heard on the one hand, but on the other hand, I might not have gone that far. I would have said maybe back in the late 80s that if you don't go to a megachurch, you're short-sighted. You just don't get it yet. I would, but now it's pretty much the opposite. It's like, what are you doing in a megachurch? For me, that's my question. Why are you there? I mean, if you're getting good teaching, okay, that's going to be rare in a megachurch. Right. If you're getting good fellowship, that's possible. Actually, it is possible with the way they divide up into small groups. Okay, I'll grant you that. But when it comes to pastoral care, it's like, what happens when you have someone who needs discipline? Is your small group? I mean, that is that's a means of grace. It's one of the marks of the church, and it's a means of grace to call lost sheep back to the fold. But no, we let them just keep on coming to the small group, even if they're.
Yeah. Well, I think it's ironic, really. I mean, you go to a big megachurch, right? And then you break up into small groups, and that's how you fellowship, really. That's where you get the majority of your fellowship, and where you get maybe even the majority of your growth. And so what they're really doing is going back to the early church model, which was the small home churches.
Yeah.
And so there's an irony there, I think. And, I look back, if you go back just to the early 1800s when George Mueller was teaching.
Bethesda Chapel.
Bethesda Chapel. Yeah. I mean, if you look at his writings, they didn't just throw wide the doors and say, come on in, I mean, they wanted people to come in, but when it came to fellowship, when it came to membership, they had to vet these people. They sat down with them and talked to them for hours about their theology. Why?
Yeah.
Because it mattered. I mean,
because it matters.
Yeah.
You just had a guy named Edward Irving just a few years ago who was teaching the sinful nature of Christ in London.
Oh, good grief.
And that was what they were up against in Mueller's day.
Yeah.
I'm talking, when I say a few years ago, during Mueller's lifetime.
Right.
I was reading about Irving. There are very few. I don't think there are any photographs of him. He died relatively young, I think in the 1840s, and he was relatively young. And but there's some drawings and sketches of him. Other than a little problem with his eyes, they say he was an amazingly handsome man, and they said he had this personal magnetism that was just incredible. and people flocked to him in droves because in the early days, he seemed to have the right message and everything seemed to be great. But from the very beginning, there was this refusal to be held accountable, refusal to work within the accountability structures that had been built into the church for very good reasons over centuries. And he ends up breaking away, founding his own denomination, and then getting kicked out of that, for his false teachings, which, we're talking, he taught that Christ had a sinful human nature. And that he was like one of the early quasi megachurch pastors in England, Scotland first, then in England. And there are lessons that the church forgot a long time ago.
Right.
After he died.
Right. And this becomes really important because as we talk about Walter Martin and cults, he is the one who kind of paved the way. So like I said earlier, the grandfather of the modern countercult movement. Not to take away what the early church fathers did, not to take away what Dr. Norm Geisler and others did in seminaries teaching that, but he kind of popularized it for those of us who had really a passion to reach people in cults. Now we have almost kind of a different problem. And I came to realize a few years back as I was going through 1 Corinthians, this was revelatory to me in my view of the purpose-driven, seeker-sensitive church versus a smaller sort of traditional church. As I was reading 1 Corinthians, I came across this passage in 14 and in verse 23 and 24, where Paul assumes the church is primarily for believers, not primarily for unbelievers. And he does it in this interesting way. He's talking about whether or not you'd be speaking in tongues. He goes, if you're speaking in tongues and if the unbeliever comes in, and I stopped and I said, wait a minute, if the unbeliever comes in, assumes unbelievers are not normally there. Right? They'll think you're nuts. But if you're prophesying, and if, again, that word if the unbeliever comes in, so Paul did not, as far as I can tell, see that the church was primarily for evangelism, but that the church was primarily for training, edifying, equipping, comforting the saints, getting them prepared to do the work of ministry, part of which is evangelism, where? Outside the church.
Right.
But we have missed that. And so it seems to me Walter Martin would probably turn his guns toward the church as much as toward cults today. Am I wrong in that?
Well, he used to say the church, what was it? Soft lights, soft music, and even softer sermons. That was back in the 70s. So he saw this day coming. And, I think it's really a testimony to God's blessing on his ministry that Kingdom of the Cults came out in 1965. This year we have a brand new version of Kingdom of the Cults coming out, a new edition of it, and it's posted up on Amazon, so you can sign up for it. But to me, that is an incredible thing that book has been in print so many years and people are still using it. It is still in colleges and seminaries. And that's a blessing that, I don't think you can really say it any other way than that God has really blessed his ministry and continues to bless it, even though he's not here.
I kind of blew past one of our short breaks, and it's an important one, especially at this juncture where we're talking about the church and where it's at, cults, and why it's important to understand those. And in some even infiltrate the church. Gwen Shamblin's Way Down workshop was in 30,000 churches across 60 denominations once we realized what was going on and exposed it publicly. And in part it's because people sort of pick and choose which parts of the Bibles and doctrines they like. And we have a sponsor that talks to that issue, actually.
Oh, yeah. Well, we want to hear from our friends here who ask, first of all, are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take the whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to check out the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. At the Bible Buffet, everything is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything is gluten-free, trans-fat-free, and truth claim-free. And all of their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat. This week's regular Sunday specials include Aryan appetizers, Sabellian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, and Pelagian pie. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. The Bible Buffet, it's not your father's worship experience. So I was going to get up. Are you going to check that out?
Jill?
I love it. That's one of my favorites. So you guys,
just so we know. Well, so is this what the cover of the new edition looks like?
Yes.
Okay, so there was an edition that came out in 2003 with
Right.
Ravi Zacharias. This is not the same one, right?
No.
Okay.
No, I've gone back to the 1980s when my father was doing the Kingdom of the Cults and tried to adjust things based on his last version of the Kingdom of the Cults, which was 1985. So we went back to a lot of those original manuscripts, and then of course it's updated for today.
I can see someone like 50 to 100 years from now trying to figure out all the different different editions. This one's labeled the 6th edition. Wow, I guess I must have missed some.
I think that's what usually they don't mark the editions, but this particular one they wanted to.
Okay, so so I think it's important for people to know that there was an edition that came out, I believe, in the 90s, right? That I would not recommend.
97, yeah, that was Hannah Graff's.
Yeah, I would say if you want to avoid any particular edition of the Kingdom of the Cults, avoid that one.
I would have to agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that really twisted some of Dr. Martin's teachings.
It did.
In fact, it just outright contradicted
yes.
Some of the things he was saying. It was not a fair representation of his thought. And then how would you rate the Ravi Zacharias edition that came out in 2003?
Well, I'm kind of prejudiced since I was the one working on that.
Oh, okay. So that was okay. You're not going to say anything bad about that. Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say it was perfect. That's one of the things I.
But it was an improvement.
Yeah, when I see my father, I worry about that. What's he going to say to me? What did you do? I mean, I'm just kind of worried about that. But no, I think we tried to stick close to what my father wanted.
Okay.
There. We got rid of a lot of the stuff that was an error from the 97, and we, brought it up to date. And then now we decided to just kind of go back and review things, look at the manuscript and line things up the way he had them lined up and just kind of stick closer to what we were pretty close in 2003, but just kind of tweaking things and bringing in a little bit more information.
So if you want a really good edition of the Kingdom of the Cults, the 2003 edition is a good one to get.
A good one.
But this is the definitive work on the subject. It says right there on the cover.
Yes.
So
and we have I got to tell you guys this really quick too. We have a
Sure.
Kingdom of the Cults handbook that's coming out. So it'll be out in March next year, and what it is a mini version of the Kingdom of the Cults, and then it's set up with some questions and places for notes. So if you're witnessing to someone and you want to take something with you that doesn't weigh like 5 pounds, then you can take the Kingdom of the Cults handbook with you.
Okay, now I have a little project for you, Jill, as we get wrapping up here. We are running over time, as we most often do, and that is this. You want to tell people how to get to your website. Ron might show that again. How they might tune in when you are co-hosting or taking over and kicking Jan Markell out of the chair.
Which I never do. I don't do that.
Why they might consider attending the EM&R conference in New Orleans, May, February, March, April, May 2 and 3, and should they ever invite Don Vino or Ron Hensel to speak in their church, and if so, why? How about that?
What was the first one again?
There you go, first one.
First one is right up there. This is waltermartin.com.
There you go. waltermartin.com.
waltermartin.com, and there's a little enter button here, right there, and okay, so that.
And you can listen to all of Jen Markell's programs. She deals with prophecy, understanding the times. So she takes the events of today and talks about their biblical link, which I think is really a wonderful thing. There's a real hunger in the church for prophecy being interpreted biblically. And so I love being a part of her ministry, which is Understanding the Times Radio, heard on 830 radio stations across America. So you can go to olivetreeviews.org to listen to those programs.
Olive Tree
Views.
Okay.
.org.
.org. Okay.
Yeah. She's also on One Place. So you can find Understanding the Times on One Place.
One Place.
Well,
okay.
I'm in another place, so we don't. So, oneplace.com. Okay.
Yep.
EM&R conference, May.
Oh, we had a great time. We had a great time with that last year. Being there, it was really an honor to be there, and it was wonderful to see all the people coming together to learn about apologetics, learn the reasons for faith, and reinforce the reasons for faith. That was really a wonderful thing.
And this year we have the EM&R, Evangelical Ministers and Religions membership, and we're teaming up with the International Society of Christian Apologetics, so you get kind of layman apologetics and academic apologetics in the same setting this year. So
that's great.
And then lastly, should they consider having Ron or I, and if so, why?
What can I say to that except absolutely? Yeah.
You could say, forget it, stay away.
I love your sense of humor, which is missing a lot in apologetics today. I love your sense of humor.
Yeah, maybe we could bring our commercials with us. Who knows?
Yeah, really.
I have done that. The Designer Jesus collection is a hit wherever we go. So, well, and you know, I almost have to, because I actually go out, and as I was sharing before we started, to things like the New Age Fair. We just had a New Age Fair here not too far from me, and I went, and while I was there, I met with the Adriana from Mystic Connections, and she's a psychic. But she didn't seem to know I was coming. I'm not sure why that happened.
It's always like that.
It kind of is. And I met with another angel readings, Rose Angel Guidance, it's called. And we talked for almost an hour. That was really quite engaging. And she wanted to throw up all of her objections to you can't trust the Bible and what happened to all the people before Jesus was born and they're now in purgatory. And I went, oh, we have a former Roman Catholic here. And we had a very interesting, very nice conversation, and I'm going to be sending her some more material. Adriana was not as happy to meet up with us, but I use humor to kind of break the ice with them. So among other things, as you know, I wear fringe jackets most of the time, so I wear my cowboy attire, and that gets discussions going. So it's kind of fun.
So you say, like, does anyone here have psychokinetic powers? Please raise my hand.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
So, Ron, you want to walk us out of here? Jill, thank you for being with us again.
Thanks for having me on.
Hold on for a moment after Ron tells us a story.
Okay, well, here's the story. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services come from Chef Hammond Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D. Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polygumus. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur, our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys. Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Ivana Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wired. Tapping at our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are totally responsible for its content, although you'll never, ever, 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 not even once, be able to prove that in a court of law. We were part of the Mueller investigation, but he couldn't even.
But he couldn't prove anything either.
Yeah, so we were thinking of introducing a beverage server. His name is Francis Ford Cup Holder. But
that's a good one.
But
well, and we are in negotiations with the Custom Bible Company, so that may be coming up soon. If you don't like the resurrection, we can just take it right out. We're a Custom Bible Company.
Yep, there you go.
So
that does it all.
All right. All right, everybody. Jill, hang on it for a minute. Everybody else, adios.
Okay.